It's not just Alberta. Saskatchewan's upset. Quebec is upset. I think that you'll hear from other provinces. They're also.
With Canada seeking to decrease its economic dependence on the U.S., how much leverage do you think Alberta will have with Ottawa in the months and years ahead, regardless of who wins the federal election this month?
I think Canada as a whole has a lot of leverage, because whether it's oil and gas, or whether it's electricity, or whether it's critical minerals, or whether it's potash, or whether it's uranium, or whether it's food, whether it's intermediate products, I think we've been able to make the case that Canada and the U.S. enjoy a special relationship that leads to benefits for both nations. I think it's part of the reason why we have, for the time being, some respect for those products that are compliant with the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, and a commitment, it looks like, from the United States to accelerate the negotiations around that rather than wait until 2026. So I'm hopeful that spirit of cooperation will extend regardless of who ends up winning on April 28th.
And just to follow up on that, I mean, there's a lot of policy objectives that Alberta has that it wants the next government to address. I guess, how much do you think the economic situation Canada is in strengthens Alberta's hand in trying to get those federal policy changes through?
I've been, every time I've given a presentation, been in a meeting, talked to media, I talk about all of the things that Canada has to offer, full stop, because all of the things that all of my colleagues in other provinces have to offer are all the things that we have to offer in Alberta. So I would say that every single province has taken the approach of working their contacts, making that case, and trying to have influence on the administration. And even though there's some work to do, obviously, on steel and aluminum, auto parts and timber, we seem to have been able to get the administration to respect the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement and the compliant goods in it until such time as we can renegotiate. And that's been an all-of-government cross-Canada approach that I think has been successful because we've been able to make the economic arguments.
Thank you, Kevin. And we have time for 2 more questions. Operator, could you put through our next caller, and then we'll come back to the room.
Rick Bell with Host Media.
It's 12 noon, so I'll say good afternoon from you. A week ago in Calgary, in person, at the Liberal rally, or actually not at the Liberal rally, a press conference following the Liberal rally, Mark Carney was asked by myself, explicitly, directly, point blank, when he talks about building big projects in Canada, whether he could make a commitment that among those big projects would be oil and gas pipelines, LNG projects. He did not, I repeat, did not make that commitment. Then this week, he is asked about pipelines again, and he is now even less supportive, talking about not necessarily, maybe, we'll see. And so what is your reaction to the fact that it feels like Groundhog Day, that we're going through the same routine as was happening when Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister? So what can you say about the fact that the Liberal leader, currently leading in the polls, seems to be very non-committal, and we know what that means, about energy projects?
Well, I would say that we have to look at the record. We've got some politicians out there campaigning who've been saying the same thing consistently, month after month, year after year. And we have another politician who says different things in French and English, different things in one part of the country versus another, and different things at the beginning of a campaign versus partway through it. So I think that it is a question of credibility. It's part of the reason why I put the 9 items on the table that we need to see repealed in order to reset the relationship with Alberta. Because if you're not prepared to honor and respect provincial rights to develop their resources, if you're not going to repeal a tanker ban, if you're not going to repeal net zero power regs, net zero vehicle regs, net zero car regs, or net zero housing regs, then you're not really serious about developing our country into an economic powerhouse. So that's up to Albertans and Canadians to decide. I've made my choice. I don't think people will be surprised who I'm voting for, but I think that is a demonstration of why it is We're having a very contested election right now. We have to make a judgment about who has credibility on these files.
And my second question is a poll that came out yesterday. I've just actually seen it just an hour ago. People being polled are asked the question, do you think talk of Western separatist movements in provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan should be taken seriously? And these are people polled coast to coast to coast. And the majority of people in this Nanos poll, published in the Globe and Mail, say yes. Almost 2 out of 3 say this kind of talk must be taken seriously. What is your reaction to that? Because this whole idea of talk of Western separatism or Alberta separatism or whatever keeps creeping in and out during this campaign.
I was just in Montreal meeting with not only the business community, but also a member of the government. And I think that there's a solution here to those kind of sentiments, whether they're in the West or whether they're in Quebec. And the solution is to honor and respect the Constitution and honor and respect provincial jurisdiction and allow for autonomy, allow for Quebec to develop policies that make sense for Quebec and allow Alberta to develop policies that make sense for Alberta. So that the pathway is there to bring the temperature down, but the question will be whether there's a will and a partner in the federal government after we see the vote on April the 28th. I'll still be asking for the same things I've been asking for the last 2.5 years, unsuccessfully with the current government. And I haven't gotten any commitments on those 9 things that I put on the table from the current Prime Minister. But I will be asking for them again, and we'll have to make a judgment at that time. But I think you're seeing that it's not just Alberta. Saskatchewan's upset. Quebec is upset. I think that you'll hear from other provinces. They're also frustrated at the level of interference in provincial jurisdictions. So I think that there may be a coalition of provinces that may finally get this country working the way it was always intended to. That's what I'll be working towards.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question. We'll go to the mic here in the room.
For Minister Williams, please, back on topic. I'm just wondering how many times an individual could go through this process. Is there a limit?
No, this is a healthcare process, so it's not as though it has some sort of criminal justice limitation, et cetera. So if somebody is a danger to themselves or others as a result of their serious addiction issue, then there's a possibility of being readmitted if you meet that standard, and then treatment would follow.
And Susan and Janelle, may I ask you guys a question as well? Thank you both for sharing your story. I'm sure you're aware there are criticisms to this model, so I'm just wondering if you could speak, from 2 folks who have lived this experience, what specifically in the government's proposed legislation felt right, felt like the next step for your family, felt humane for your family?
I can take it. I think that it's the opportunity for long-term care, because some of the facilities that are available that I looked into when my son was going through treatment were short-term. And I had watched him detox numerous times and knew that the length of time wasn't enough. And so to be able to have them go through detox into long-term care, to make relationships, to change the relationships with people that they currently have, is more meaningful for a long-term recovery. And that's where I think the success in this would lie.